When Sean Connery first appeared as James Bond in 1962's Dr. No, his midnight blue tuxedo became cinema's most iconic suit. But the secrets behind 007's wardrobe are stranger than you'd imagine. From directors forcing actors to sleep in their clothes to Royal Navy belts stolen on beaches and tie knots that broke Ian Fleming's golden rule, Bond's first fashion statement was built on budget constraints, bizarre filming techniques, and costume chaos. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about James Bond's tuxedo in Dr. No. 1962. Fact 1. The director made Connery sleep in his suits. When director Terence Young set out to transform a relatively unknown Scottish bodybuilder named Sean Connery into the world's most sophisticated secret agent, he knew that wardrobe alone wouldn't be enough. Connery didn't have the natural polish or upper-class refinement that audiences would expect from James Bond, so Young took an unconventional approach to help his leading man embody the character. According to multiple accounts from the production, Young reportedly instructed Connery to wear his bespoke Anthony Sinclair suits around the clock, even suggesting that he should sleep in them to make the clothing feel like a second skin. The idea behind this unusual directive was simple but effective. Young wanted Connery to move through the world with the ease and confidence of someone who had been wearing expensive tailored suits his entire life, not someone who was still getting used to the feel of Savile Row craftsmanship. By having Connery live in the suits day and night, the fabric would naturally mold to his body, the creases would settle in the right places, and most importantly, Connery would stop thinking about what he was wearing. This was crucial, because Bond needed to appear completely at home in formal attire, as if a perfectly cut suit was as natural to him as casual clothes would be to anyone else. In a 1960s interview, tailor Anthony Sinclair himself touched on this philosophy, explaining that any well-made suit should be able to withstand being rolled into a ball, crushed, stamped on, and slept in, then emerge looking perfect again. The suits were designed to be resilient enough to handle whatever Connery put them through during this unusual breaking-in process. Director Young's hands-on approach extended beyond just the suits too, as he personally took Connery to dinner, showed him how to walk, talk, and even how to eat like a refined gentleman, essentially using his own lifestyle as the template for Bond's on-screen persona. Fact 2. Only 3 suits for the entire film. Despite launching what would become one of the most successful and longest-running film franchises in history, Dr. No was made on a remarkably tight budget, and this financial constraint had a direct impact on James Bond's wardrobe. The production could only afford to have 3 lounge suits tailored for Sean Connery by the prestigious London tailor Anthony Sinclair, who had his shop on Conduit Street just off Savile Row. These 3 suits consisted of 1 dark gray flannel, 1 light gray mohair, and 1 gray Glen check pattern, and they had to serve for all of Bond's non-formal scenes throughout the entire movie. What makes this limitation even more striking is that these suits went on to define the look of James Bond for decades to come, despite being born out of budget restrictions rather than lavish costume design. The filmmakers had to be extremely strategic about when and how they used each suit, carefully planning which scenes would feature which outfit to create the illusion of a more extensive wardrobe. All 3 suits were crafted in the conduit cut style that Anthony Sinclair had developed, featuring a button-2 front, 4-button cuffs, double forward pleated trousers with turn-ups, and button side-tab waist adjusters instead of belts or braces. The choice to go with 3 variations of gray was both practical and stylish, as the neutral tones photographed well on camera and could be paired with different shirts and ties to create variety. The dark gray flannel provided a more formal business look, the light gray mohair offered a lighter option suitable for warmer climates, and the Glen check added a touch of pattern and texture. Interestingly, these specific fabric choices became such favorites during the production that they continued to appear in various forms throughout Sean Connery's entire run as Bond in the 1960s, establishing gray suits as a signature element of the character's style. Fact 3. The tuxedo featured rare gauntlet cuffs. One of the most distinctive yet often overlooked details of James Bond's legendary midnight blue tuxedo in Dr. No is the presence of silk gauntlet cuffs, also known as turnback cuffs, which were an Edwardian decorative element that had seen a resurgence in popularity during the 1950s and early 1960s. These cuffs feature a turned-back portion at the end of each sleeve that curves backward about an inch or so, creating a layered effect that extends approximately to the first button on the cuff. In the film's opening casino scene, the camera actually lingers on these distinctive cuffs before we even see Sean Connery's face, giving viewers their very first glimpse of Bond through this elegant tailoring detail. The gauntlet cuff has an interesting practical origin that goes back centuries, borrowing its name from the protective glove portion of medieval armor that shielded the lower arm from battle wounds. In tailoring, the turnback cuff serves a similar protective function, providing an extra layer of fabric at the end of the sleeve where wear and tear naturally occurs most frequently. The original purpose was that when the cuff portion became worn out or frayed from daily use, a tailor could simply remove and replace just that section, rather than having to repair or remake the entire sleeve, making it both a practical and economical design choice for expensive garments. By the time Dr. No was filmed in 1962, the gauntlet cuff had become primarily decorative rather than functional, adding a subtle touch of old-world elegance and refinement to formal wear. The midnight blue satin silk used for Bond's gauntlet cuffs matched the shawl collar and other silk trimmings on the dinner jacket, creating a cohesive and polished look. Each cuff also featured 4 silk-covered buttons that fasten normally, with the decorative turnback adding visual interest without being too flashy or ostentatious, perfectly capturing the restrained sophistication that would become synonymous with James Bond's style. Fact 4. Bond wore the wrong tie knot. In one of the most ironic contradictions between Ian Fleming's literary James Bond and the cinematic version, Sean Connery wore a Windsor knot with his ties throughout Dr. No, despite the fact that Fleming's original character absolutely despised this particular style of tie knot. In Fleming's novel From Russia with Love, Bond famously observes a character wearing a Windsor knot and thinks to himself that it was tied with a Windsor knot, and that Bond mistrusted anyone who tied his tie with a Windsor knot because it showed too much vanity and was often the mark of a cad. This was Fleming's way of using small details like clothing choices to reveal character, suggesting that someone who chose such a large, symmetrical, and showy knot was not to be trusted. The Windsor knot is larger and more symmetrical than the standard 4-in-hand knot that most men use, and it was designed to mimic the thick, substantial knots worn by the Duke of Windsor, which is how it got its name. Many people in Britain at the time considered the Windsor knot to be somewhat vulgar or pretentious because of its size and perfect symmetry, preferring the more casual and asymmetrical appearance of a 4-in-hand knot instead. However, Sean Connery personally preferred the Windsor knot and wore it in many of his other films outside of the Bond series, including movies like The Frightened City, Diamonds Are Forever, The Offense, and Wrong is Right. The most likely explanation for this discrepancy is that Connery simply tied his ties the way he was comfortable tying them, and nobody on set thought to enforce Fleming's specific preference about tie knots from the novels. Dr. No and Diamonds Are Forever ended up being the only 2 official Bond films where Connery used the Windsor knot, as the later films switched to the 4-in-hand style that Fleming had originally envisioned for the character. Fact 5. The Homburg hat appeared only once. When James Bond arrives at the office of Universal Imports in the early scenes of Dr. No, he completes his formal evening wear ensemble with a black Homburg hat, which he wears over his midnight blue dinner jacket and navy Chesterfield overcoat. The Homburg is a specific style of formal hat made from black felt with a distinctive center crease in the crown, a stiff brim with an upturned edge, and a black gross-grain ribbon band around the base. It was considered extremely formal headwear in the early 1960s, typically reserved for businessmen, diplomats, and other conservative professionals who wanted to project an image of serious authority and traditional respectability. However, this particular style choice turned out to be a misstep for the character, as the Homburg made Bond look far too formal, stuffy, and old-fashioned, rather than the sleek and modern secret agent the filmmakers were trying to create. The hat gave Connery's Bond an appearance that was more suited to a banker or politician from an earlier generation, rather than a dynamic and youthful spy who represented the cutting edge of style and sophistication. After seeing how the Homburg photographed on screen and how it affected the overall impression of the character, the decision was made to never use this style of hat again in any subsequent Bond film. In fact, Bond only wears a hat with his dinner jacket one more time in the entire franchise, and that occurs in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where George Lazenby's Bond wears a black trilby instead, which is a much less formal and more contemporary style of hat with a softer, more casual appearance. The trilby had a snap brim that could be angled stylishly and gave off a completely different vibe compared to the rigid formality of the Homburg. This makes Dr. No the only film in the entire James Bond series where the character wears a Homburg hat, a piece of wardrobe history that stands out precisely because it was deemed unsuccessful and never repeated. Fact 6. Bond committed a major suit faux pas. In what stands as perhaps the biggest wardrobe mistake in Dr. No, there's a scene where James Bond fastens the bottom button of his gray flannel suit jacket, committing one of the most fundamental errors in men's tailoring that anyone who wears suits regularly knows to avoid. The basic rule of wearing a two-button suit jacket is that you should always fasten only the top button and leave the bottom button undone, as this allows the jacket to drape properly across the body and maintain the elegant lines that the tailor designed into the garment. When you button both buttons on a two-button jacket, the fabric pulls awkwardly across the midsection, the jacket loses its natural shape, and the whole silhouette becomes distorted and unflattering. This mistake is particularly jarring because James Bond is supposed to be a character who knows exactly how to dress impeccably and who appreciates the finer things in life, including proper tailoring and etiquette. The whole point of Bond's character is that he does everything correctly and with sophistication, whether that's ordering the right wine, driving with precision, or wearing his clothes with effortless style. Having him fasten both buttons of his suit jacket makes it look like he doesn't actually understand how to wear a suit properly, which completely contradicts everything else the filmmakers were trying to establish about his refined taste and worldly knowledge. What makes this error even more puzzling is that the suits were custom-made by Anthony Sinclair, one of the finest tailors on Savile Row, and were cut specifically to look their best when worn according to proper conventions. Director Terence Young had gone to great lengths to teach Sean Connery how to move, speak, and behave like a sophisticated gentleman, yet somehow this basic mistake slipped through during filming and made it into the final cut of the movie, creating a moment that stands out to anyone who knows proper suit etiquette. Fact 7. Ursula Andress's belt was stolen from a sailor. The iconic white webbing belt that became an essential part of Ursula Andress's legendary bikini in Dr. No has an unexpected origin story that involves a chance encounter on a Jamaican beach and a Royal Navy officer who never got his property back. According to Gordon Joslin, who was 83 years old when he finally revealed this story decades later, he was serving as a 28-year-old acting sick-berth petty officer aboard the frigate HMS Trowbridge when the ship happened to be stationed near the beach where the film crew was shooting the famous scene of Honey Rider emerging from the ocean. Joslin recalled that he and other sailors from the ship were on the beach watching the filming when Ursula Andress, after looking at her costume, apparently felt that something was missing from the outfit and that it needed an additional element to complete the look. A member of the film crew was quickly dispatched to approach the naval officers who were standing nearby, asking if any of them could help with the wardrobe situation. Joslin remembered the moment vividly, saying that his petty officer looked directly at him and said, "Let's have your webbing belt," then grabbed it right off him and immediately wrapped it around Ursula Andress's hips to see how it would look with the white bikini. The British Army webbing belt, which featured brass buckles and fittings along with a scabbard on the left side to hold her diving knife, turned out to be exactly what the costume needed, adding a practical and slightly adventurous element to what was otherwise a simple two-piece swimsuit. Andress then filmed the iconic scene with Joslin's belt secured around her waist, and as Joslin noted with a touch of resignation in his later interview, he never got the belt back after the production wrap, making it a permanent and now historically significant donation to cinema history. Fact 8. The bikini was made by a local dressmaker. What would become the most famous bikini in cinema history almost didn't exist at all, as Ursula Andress discovered when she arrived in Jamaica for filming that none of her costumes had been prepared or were ready for her to wear. This last-minute wardrobe crisis actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise because it meant that Andress had the opportunity to collaborate directly on designing something that would fit her perfectly and match her own vision for the character. She worked closely with director Terence Young and costume designer Tessa Prendergast, whom she had previously met while living in Rome, to create a bikini that would suit her 5'6" frame with her 36-24-36 measurements. Rather than rushing to have something shipped in from London or sourcing a mass-produced swimsuit from a local store, the production team decided to have the bikini custom-made right there on location in Jamaica by a West Indian dressmaker who was known to both Andress and Young. This local artisan created the iconic two-piece swimsuit as a complete one-off, meaning only a single bikini was ever made for the film, with no backups or duplicates created during production. The bikini top was actually constructed using Andres's own personal underwire bra as the foundation, which was then covered in ivory cotton fabric, with the cups featuring darted and ruched panels that were gathered and cinched together in the center with a decorative bow tie detail. The matching bikini bottoms were lined in sheer cotton and decorated with pleated fabric and hoop details on both hips, with a hook and eye closure on the left hip for fastening. Because this was designed as a practical working garment that needed to withstand the physical demands of filming action scenes in the water, the dressmaker focused on making it durable and functional rather than just visually appealing, which is why it held up so well throughout the demanding production schedule. Fact 9. Dr. No gave Bond an Asian-inspired outfit. After James Bond is captured and becomes a prisoner on Crab Key Island, the villain Dr. No provides him with clothes to wear for dinner, and these garments reflect the antagonist's own cultural background and fashion preferences rather than Bond's typical Western style. The main piece of this outfit is a brown silk Nehru jacket, which features a distinctive mandarin collar that stands up around the neck and 5 dark brown horn buttons running down the front from the waist to the collar. The Nehru jacket gets its name from Jawaharlal Nehru, who served as India's first Prime Minister from 1947 to 1964, though interestingly, Nehru himself never actually wore the modified shorter version that became popular and was named after him. What makes this costume choice particularly significant is that Dr. No was released in October of 1962, which means the film came out just before the Nehru jacket exploded in popularity throughout Europe and America during the mid to late 1960s, when it was embraced by fashionable celebrities and musicians, including the Beatles and Sammy Davis Jr. By featuring this style of jacket in the film before it became a mainstream trend, the costume designers were actually ahead of the cultural curve and introduced many Western audiences to this type of Asian-inspired formal wear for the first time. The decision to dress Bond in this outfit also served an important storytelling purpose, as it helped establish Dr. No's character as someone with Eastern tastes and sensibilities, which made sense given that the villain was described as being half Chinese and half German in the film. This moment created a template that would be repeated throughout the Bond franchise, where villains are often characterized partly through their non-Western fashion choices and cultural preferences, setting them apart from Bond's traditional British style and reinforcing the idea of an exotic and foreign threat. Fact 10. The Tuxedo broke 2 formal wear rules. James Bond's iconic midnight blue dinner jacket in Dr. No technically violated 2 important rules of traditional black tie etiquette, yet these breaks from convention ended up working perfectly for the character and even influenced how men would approach formal wear in the decades that followed. The first transgression was the presence of double vents at the back of the jacket, which are the splits in the fabric that allow for easier movement and a better fit when sitting down. According to strict formal wear traditionalists, a proper dinner jacket should either have no vents at all for the most formal look, or possibly a single center vent, but never the double side vents that are more commonly associated with business suits and less formal tailoring. The second rule that Bond's dinner jacket broke was the absence of any waist covering, meaning he wore neither a waistcoat nor a cummerbund with his tuxedo, leaving his shirt and trouser waistband fully visible when the jacket was unbuttoned. Traditional black tie conventions dictated that a man should always wear either a black waistcoat or a black cummerbund to cover the waistline and create a continuous line of black from the neck down to the trousers, with only the white shirt visible at the chest and cuffs. The purpose of this rule was both aesthetic and practical, as it created a more streamlined silhouette and also hid the mechanical details of where the shirt tucked into the trousers. However, both of these departures from tradition actually made sense for James Bond as a man of action who needed to move freely and comfortably while still looking impeccably dressed. The double vents allowed the jacket to drape better when he was sitting, standing, or moving quickly, while skipping the waistcoat or cummerbund kept the overall look sleeker and less fussy. Many stylish men at the time would not have considered these choices to be serious violations, and Bond's example helped normalize these more practical approaches to black tie dressing. Fact 11. Heavy wool suits in Caribbean heat. One of the most puzzling wardrobe choices in Dr. No is that James Bond spends much of his time in Jamaica wearing heavy wool suits that would have been absolutely sweltering in the tropical Caribbean climate, raising questions about whether this sophisticated and well-traveled spy actually knew how to dress appropriately for different environments. The dark gray flannel suit that Bond wears prominently throughout several scenes would have been made from thick wool fabric designed to provide warmth in cold British weather, making it completely unsuitable for Jamaica's heat and humidity, where temperatures regularly climb into the high 80s and low 90s Fahrenheit, with intense tropical sun beating down throughout the day. Even more inappropriately, Bond also wears a navy doeskin blazer during his time on the island, and doeskin is an extremely heavy and dense fabric with a soft, suede-like finish that was traditionally used for making warm clothing meant for cold climates. Wearing such substantial wool garments in the Caribbean would have left Bond sweating profusely and feeling extremely uncomfortable, which seems like a strange choice for a character who is supposed to be competent and knowledgeable about every aspect of international travel, and who should certainly know better than to pack winter-weight clothing for a tropical assignment. The suits themselves were beautifully tailored and looked absolutely perfect on screen, which was obviously the priority for the filmmakers who wanted Bond to appear impeccably dressed at all times regardless of practical considerations. However, from a character standpoint, this represents a genuine lapse in judgment that doesn't align with Bond's portrayal as someone who thinks of everything and always makes the right decisions. A truly experienced international operative would have brought lightweight tropical wool suits, linen blazers, or cotton garments that would breathe in the heat while still maintaining a professional and elegant appearance suitable for his cover as a sophisticated British gentleman. Fact 12. The iconic tuxedo color trick. Although James Bond's dinner jacket appears to be black when viewers watch Dr. No, the garment was actually tailored in a shade called midnight blue, which is a very dark navy color that looks almost black to the naked eye, but has subtle blue undertones that behave differently under artificial lighting than true black fabric does. This color choice was not made by accident or personal preference, but rather represents a sophisticated understanding of how different fabrics and colors photograph under the powerful lights used in film production during the early 1960s. The science behind this choice is that true black fabric has a tendency to look slightly faded or even appear as a dark gray color when filmed under bright studio lights, because black absorbs light so completely that it can seem flat and lack the depth and richness that filmmakers want for formal evening wear. Midnight blue, on the other hand, actually appears darker and richer than black when photographed under artificial lighting, creating a deeper and more elegant appearance on camera while also providing subtle variation in tone that helps define the shape and drape of the garment rather than appearing as a flat, featureless silhouette. This trick was well known among tailors who dressed clients for formal events that would be photographed or filmed, and it had been used for decades before Dr. No by men who wanted to look their absolute best in pictures. By choosing midnight blue for Bond's dinner jacket, tailor Anthony Sinclair and director Terence Young demonstrated their attention to detail and their understanding of how clothing translates to film. The choice proved so successful that midnight blue became the standard color for James Bond's formal wear throughout most of the franchise, with Sean Connery wearing midnight blue dinner jackets in multiple subsequent films and the color becoming permanently associated with the character's signature look. Fact 13. 3 different shirt makers claimed credit. The question of who actually made James Bond's shirts for Dr. No has become surprisingly complicated over the years, with 3 different prestigious shirt makers either claiming credit or being credited by others for providing the garments that Sean Connery wore throughout the film. Director Terence Young stated in interviews that the French luxury brand Lanvin had made shirts for the production, which would have made sense given that Young was a sophisticated man with connections to high-end European fashion houses and had brought his own personal tailor Anthony Sinclair into the project to dress Connery. Adding to the confusion, the British shirt maker Frank Foster also came forward at some point to say that he had made shirts for Dr. No, and Foster was a well-respected craftsman who would later go on to make the distinctive cocktail cuff shirts for Roger Moore during his time as Bond in the 1970s. However, despite these claims from 2 different sources, the only shirt maker that has actually been able to produce documented evidence and records proving that they made shirts for the film is Turnbull and Asser, the legendary German street shirt maker that has been dressing British gentlemen since 1885. Turnbull and Asser has maintained records showing that they created the white shirts with pleated fronts and the distinctive cocktail cuffs that appear throughout Dr. No, and when costume experts and Bond-style historians examine the shirts in the film, they note that the construction and styling details match Turnbull and Asser's signature techniques and design elements from that era. It's possible that all three shirt makers contributed different shirts to the production at various points, or that some shirts were made for costume tests or promotional materials, but didn't end up being used in the actual film. But without clear documentation, Turnbull and Asser remains the only shirt maker with verifiable proof of their involvement. Fact 14. Continuity errors with Bond's deck shoes. During the sequences filmed on Crab Key Island, a noticeable continuity error occurs with James Bond's footwear that reveals the tight budget constraints the production was working under and the lengths the costume department went to in order to protect their limited resources. Throughout most of the island scenes, Bond wears a pair of casual laced deck shoes that are appropriate for the beach and jungle terrain he's navigating, and these shoes appear consistently in the majority of shots as he explores the island with Honey Rider and attempts to evade Dr. No's guards. However, in the specific shots where Bond's shoes are shown covered in thick mud after he's been trudging through the swampy areas of the island, careful viewers will notice that the footwear has mysteriously changed from the laced deck shoes into a completely different style of slip-on loafers. This switch happens briefly, and then the shoes change back to the original laced style in subsequent scenes, creating an obvious but easily missed continuity mistake that made it into the final cut of the film. The reason for this strange shoe swap was purely practical and budget-related, as the production apparently only had one pair of the laced deck shoes available for Sean Connery to wear during filming. The costume department was understandably concerned about ruining this single pair of shoes by covering them in mud for the swamp scenes, especially since they still needed the shoes to look presentable for other scenes that had not yet been filmed. Their solution was to use a different pair of cheaper slip-on loafers as a stand-in specifically for the muddy shots, figuring that most audience members would be focused on the action and drama of the scene rather than closely examining what type of shoes Bond was wearing. This brief costume substitution likely saved the production money and protected their only good pair of deck shoes, even though it created a continuity error that Bond enthusiasts and costume experts have noticed over the years. Fact 15. The cocktail cuff shirts were Bond's signature. One of the most distinctive but subtle details that set James Bond apart from ordinary well-dressed men in Dr. No was the unusual cocktail cuffs on his dress shirts, which featured a unique turned-back two-button design that required special tailoring and was not something you could simply buy off the rack at any department store. Unlike standard French cuffs that fold back on themselves and fasten with cufflinks, or regular barrel cuffs that button at the wrist, cocktail cuffs have a section of fabric that turns back and fastens with two buttons, creating a layered effect that adds visual interest while still maintaining a refined and elegant appearance. This particular style of cuff was not common in men's shirts during the early 1960s, making it an ideal choice for establishing Bond as someone who paid attention to the finer details of his wardrobe and who had access to the kind of custom shirt making that most men would never experience. The cocktail cuffs appeared on both the white and light blue shirts that Sean Connery wore throughout the film, adding the only real flourish to what was otherwise a very restrained and understated wardrobe built around solid colors and simple designs. The philosophy behind this approach was that Bond's sophistication should come from exceptional quality and subtle, unique details rather than flashy patterns or bold style choices. The turned-back design of the cocktail cuff also served a practical purpose, as it provided an extra layer of fabric at the wrist area where shirts tend to show the most wear from rubbing against watch bands, jacket cuffs, and desk surfaces throughout daily use. This made the cocktail cuff similar in concept to the gauntlet cuffs on Bond's dinner jacket, offering both aesthetic appeal and functional durability. The introduction of cocktail cuffs in Dr. No established them as a signature element of Bond's style that would appear throughout multiple films in the franchise.